The Blacksmith's Daughter by Simon Cross. The hammer fell with such force that sparks danced across the anvil like tiny stars against the darkness of the forge. Catherine McBride wiped the perspiration from her brow with the back of her leather glove, her auburn hair escaping from its practical braid, despite her best efforts to keep it contained. The rhythmic sound of metal against metal had been her lullaby since childhood, but today it failed to calm her restless spirit. "Cat, you're going to wear yourself thin if you keep working like that," her father's voice carried from the doorway of their modest home adjacent to the smithy. James McBride stood watching his daughter with the same mixture of pride and concern that had marked his expression for the past year, ever since her mother's passing had left them both adrift in their grief. "The Martinez family needs their wagon wheel repaired before they head to Denver," Catherine replied, not pausing in her work. "And Mrs. Henderson's fence won't mend itself." The truth was that Catherine found solace in the forge's heat, and the satisfaction of shaping raw metal into something useful. It was honest work, and in the small town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, honest work was respected regardless of whether it came from a man's hands or a woman's. Her father had taught her the trade when she was barely tall enough to reach the anvil, never imagining that one day she would be the finest smith in 3 counties. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Catherine looked up to see a rider approaching at a leisurely pace, his silhouette outlined against the late afternoon sky. Even from a distance, she could tell he was a stranger. Cedar Ridge was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's horse, and this black stallion was unfamiliar. As the rider drew closer, Catherine found herself studying him with more attention than she typically paid to passing travelers. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to long journeys, his dark hair slightly longer than was fashionable, and his clothes well made but practical. When he dismounted and approached the forge, she noticed his eyes, a striking shade of blue that seemed to take in everything at once. "Good afternoon, miss," he said, removing his hat with a politeness that seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "I'm looking for someone who might be able to help with a broken bridle. The leather shop in town is closed, but I was told someone here might be able to manage a temporary repair." Catherine set down her hammer and turned to face him fully. "I can take a look at it, though I'm more accustomed to working with iron than leather." "I'm grateful for any assistance," he replied, and something in his tone made her believe he meant it. "I'm Thomas Brennan, by the way. I apologize for not introducing myself properly." "Catherine McBride," she responded, accepting the bridle he offered. "Most folks call me Cat." As she examined the broken leather, she was aware of his gaze upon her. It wasn't the dismissive look she sometimes received from men who couldn't quite believe a woman could manage a forge, nor was it the inappropriate attention that occasionally made her uncomfortable. Instead, it was curious, respectful, and somehow warm. "You're not from around here," she observed, not looking up from her work. "No, I'm not. I'm a lawyer, actually traveling from San Francisco to handle some business in Denver. I thought I'd take the scenic route and see some of the country I've only heard about." Catherine glanced up at him, surprised. "A lawyer? That's quite a change from the usual travelers we see." Thomas smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "I imagine most of your visitors are miners or ranchers. I must seem rather out of place." "Different maybe, but not unwelcome," Catherine found herself saying, then immediately felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had never been one to flirt. Indeed, she had little experience with it, but something about this man seemed to bring out a side of herself she didn't recognize. "I can make a temporary repair," she continued, focusing on the bridle to hide her embarrassment. "It won't be pretty, but it should hold until you can get to a proper leather worker." "That's more than I hoped for," Thomas said. "How long have you been working as a blacksmith?" "Since I was old enough to hold a hammer," Catherine replied, beginning to work on the repair. "My father taught me the trade, though I suspect he never imagined I'd make it my profession." "It's remarkable work," Thomas observed, looking around the forge with genuine interest. "I've seen plenty of smithies, but never one quite so well organized." Catherine felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "Organization is half the battle in any trade," she said, "though I suspect law is much the same." "You'd be surprised," Thomas replied with a laugh. "Some of my colleagues seem to thrive on chaos." As Catherine worked, they continued to talk, and she found herself enjoying the conversation more than she had enjoyed anything in recent memory. Thomas was intelligent without being condescending, curious without being intrusive, and possessed of a dry wit that made her laugh despite herself. "There," she said finally, holding up the repaired bridle. It's not beautiful, but it should serve you well." Thomas examined her work and nodded approvingly. "It's better than I expected. What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Catherine said quickly. "It was a small job." "I insist," Thomas replied, reaching into his pocket. "A craftsman should be paid for their work, regardless of the size of the job." Catherine accepted the coins he offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact sent an unexpected shiver through her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes that suggested he had felt it too. "Will you be staying in Cedar Ridge long?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. "I had planned to leave tomorrow morning," Thomas said, "but I find myself in no particular hurry. The business in Denver can wait a few more days." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. "Well, if you need any other repairs." "I'll be sure to come to you," Thomas finished, settling his hat back on his head. "Thank you, Miss McBride, for the repair and for the conversation." As he rode away, Catherine watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she returned to her work, but found her mind wandering to blue eyes and an easy smile. She had met many travelers over the years, but none had affected her quite like Thomas Brennan. The next morning brought the usual routine of stoking the forge and preparing for the day's work. But Catherine found herself glancing toward the road more often than usual. She told herself it was merely curiosity about whether the lawyer would indeed extend his stay, but she knew the truth was more complicated than that. Her father emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, one of which he handed to her. "You seem distracted this morning," he observed. "Just thinking about the day's work," Catherine replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. James McBride was not easily fooled, however. He had raised his daughter alone for most of her life, and he knew her moods better than anyone. Would this have anything to do with the gentleman who stopped by yesterday? Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks again. He needed a bridal repair, nothing more. Her father replied, but his eyes were twinkling. "Well, if he's as respectable as he appeared, he might be worth getting to know." Before Catherine could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Thomas Brennan was walking toward them, leading his horse and carrying what appeared to be a picnic basket. "Good morning," he called out cheerfully. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," James replied before Catherine could speak. "I'm James McBride, Kat's father. I don't believe we were properly introduced yesterday." The 2 men shook hands, and Catherine noticed the way her father seemed to be sizing up Thomas with the protective instincts of a man who had only one daughter. "I was wondering," Thomas said, turning to Catherine, "if you might have time to show me some of the local countryside. I've heard there are some beautiful views from the ridge above town, and I thought perhaps you might join me for a picnic lunch." Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. I have work to do." "Nothing that can't wait," her father interjected, earning a sharp look from his daughter. "Go on, Kat, you work too hard as it is." "I don't want to impose," Thomas said, but his eyes were hopeful. Catherine looked between her father and Thomas, recognizing that she was being maneuvered, but finding herself not entirely opposed to the idea. "I suppose I could spare a few hours," she said finally. "Excellent," Thomas replied, his smile broad. "I took the liberty of asking Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house to prepare something for us. I hope you don't mind." 20 minutes later, Catherine found herself walking beside Thomas up the winding path that led to the ridge overlooking Cedar Ridge. She had changed from her work clothes into a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had taken more care with her hair than she had in months. "It's beautiful country," Thomas observed as they climbed. "I can see why people would want to settle here." "It's not easy living," Catherine replied. "The winters are harsh and the summers can be brutal. But there's something about the land that gets into your blood." "Have you ever wanted to leave?" Thomas asked. Catherine considered the question. "When I was younger, I used to dream about seeing the world. But after my mother died, I couldn't imagine leaving my father. And now I'm not sure I'd want to." They reached the top of the ridge, and Thomas spread a blanket on the grass. The view was spectacular. The town spread out below them like a miniature version of itself, with the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. "This is incredible," Thomas said, settling beside her on the blanket. "I've seen a lot of country, but this is special." As they ate, they talked about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. Catherine found herself opening up to Thomas in ways she had never done with anyone else. He told her about his childhood in Boston, his decision to become a lawyer, and his move to San Francisco in search of adventure. "What made you decide to take this particular route to Denver?" Catherine asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I was feeling restless. Successful but restless. I have a good practice, a nice home, everything I thought I wanted. But something was missing." "And you thought you'd find it on the road?" "I thought I might find perspective," Thomas replied. "I never expected to find—" He trailed off, his eyes meeting hers. "What?" Catherine prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You," Thomas said simply. "I never expected to find you." The words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and danger. Catherine felt as though she were standing at the edge of a precipice, with the choice to step back to safety or leap into the unknown. "Thomas," she began, but he reached out and touched her hand gently. "I know this is sudden," he said. "I know we've only just met. But I can't pretend I don't feel something here, something I've never felt before." Catherine looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. She had always been practical, sensible, the kind of woman who thought things through carefully before acting. But sitting here with Thomas, she felt alive in a way she had never experienced. "I feel it too," she admitted quietly. "But I don't know what it means." "Neither do I," Thomas replied. "But I'd like to find out, if you're willing." Catherine looked up at him, seeing honesty and hope in his blue eyes. "I'm willing," she said, and felt as though she had just changed the course of her entire life. Over the next several days, Thomas found reasons to extend his stay in Cedar Ridge. He helped Catherine with small tasks around the forge, despite her protests that a lawyer had no business handling hot metal. He proved surprisingly adept at organization, helping her streamline her inventory and creating a system for tracking orders that impressed even her practical father. "You've got a good head for business," Catherine observed one afternoon as they worked together to repair a complex piece of machinery for the local mill. "Law and business aren't so different," Thomas replied, handing her the tool she needed before she asked for it. "Both require attention to detail and the ability to see how different pieces fit together." Catherine was struck by how well they worked together, as though they had been partners for years rather than days. Thomas seemed to anticipate her needs, and she found herself explaining her work to him in ways that made her appreciate her own skills more deeply. "You're a remarkable woman, Catherine McBride," Thomas said suddenly, causing her to look up from her work. "What makes you say that?" "You've mastered a trade that most men struggle with. You've built a successful business in a town that probably wasn't entirely welcoming to a woman blacksmith at first. You've cared for your father and maintained your integrity and kindness despite what must have been significant challenges." Catherine felt tears in her eyes at his words. "You make it sound more noble than it is. I simply did what needed to be done." "That's exactly what makes it noble," Thomas replied. "You don't see yourself clearly, do you?" Before Catherine could respond, her father appeared in the doorway. "Cat, we've got visitors." Catherine looked up to see Mayor Henderson and two other town council members approaching. The mayor was a portly man with a reputation for self-importance, and the expression on his face suggested this was not a social call. "Miss McBride," the mayor began formally, "we need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Catherine wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. "What kind of concerns?" "There's been talk about your association with this gentleman," Mayor Henderson said, glancing meaningfully at Thomas. "Some of our more conservative residents are uncomfortable with the amount of time you've been spending together without proper supervision." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but this time it was from anger rather than embarrassment. "I'm 25 years old, Mayor Henderson. I hardly think I need supervision." "Nevertheless," the mayor continued, "we must consider the reputation of our town. Perhaps it would be best if Mr. Brennan continued on his journey." Thomas stepped forward, his expression calm but his eyes hard. "With respect, Mayor Henderson, I'm not sure what business it is of yours how Miss McBride chooses to spend her time." "It becomes our business when it affects the moral character of our community," one of the other council members interjected. "The moral character of your community?" Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean the community that depends on Miss McBride's skill and integrity? The community that benefits from her hard work and fair dealing? That community?" Catherine placed a hand on Thomas's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "It's all right," she said quietly. "No, it's not all right," Thomas replied, his gaze never leaving the mayor's face. "These gentlemen are suggesting that spending time with a respectable woman in broad daylight, often in the presence of her father, is somehow improper. I find that attitude both insulting and hypocritical." The mayor's face reddened. "Young man, you would do well to remember that you are a guest in our town. And you would do well to remember that Miss McBride is a citizen of this town who deserves your respect and support, not your judgment," Thomas shot back. The confrontation might have escalated further, but Catherine stepped between them. "Gentlemen, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. If you have legitimate concerns about my conduct, you're welcome to speak with me privately, but I won't have my personal life debated in public." The mayor and his companions exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Finally, Mayor Henderson nodded stiffly. "Very well. But we trust you'll consider what we've said." After they left, Catherine sank onto a nearby stool, feeling suddenly exhausted. Thomas knelt beside her, his expression concerned. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean for my presence to cause trouble for you." "It's not your fault," Catherine replied. "Some people in this town have very narrow ideas about how a woman should behave. Have you had to deal with this kind of thing before?" Catherine nodded. "When I first started working the forge full-time, there were those who thought it was unseemly. But I proved myself, and most people came to accept it. This is different, though." "Different how?" "Because this time, it's not just about my work. It's about my personal life, my choices as a woman." Catherine looked up at him. "They're not wrong about one thing: we have been spending a lot of time together." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Catherine, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about my business in Denver, and I've decided not to continue the journey." Catherine's heart leapt. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm thinking about staying in Cedar Ridge, permanently." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Catherine felt her world shift on its axis. "But your practice in San Francisco can be managed by my partner. I've been considering expanding anyway, and Colorado is full of opportunities for a lawyer." Thomas reached for her hands. "Catherine, I know this is sudden, but I can't imagine leaving you. I love you." The declaration sent a shock through Catherine's system. She had hoped, had wondered, but to hear the words spoken aloud was both thrilling and terrifying. "Thomas," she whispered, "I love you too." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but instead of falling, she felt as though she were flying. Thomas's decision to remain in Cedar Ridge created a sensation in the small town. Within days, everyone knew that the lawyer from San Francisco had decided to establish a practice there, and speculation about his reasons was rampant. The more romantically inclined residents were delighted by the obvious attachment between Thomas and Catherine, while the more conservative element continued to express concerns about the propriety of their courtship. Catherine found herself caught between her happiness and her frustration with the town's gossips. She had always been a private person, and having her personal life become a subject of public discussion was deeply uncomfortable. "Let them talk," her father advised one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "People will always find something to gossip about. The important thing is that you're happy." "I am happy," Catherine replied, "happier than I ever thought possible. But I worry about the effect on Thomas. He's trying to establish a practice here, and this kind of talk could hurt his reputation." "Thomas is a grown man who can make his own decisions," James pointed out. "And from what I've seen, he's not the type to be swayed by small-town gossip." Catherine's father proved to be correct. Thomas threw himself into establishing his practice with determination and skill. He rented a small office above the general store, and within weeks he had attracted several clients impressed by his professionalism and expertise. His success only seemed to fuel the gossip, however, as some people suggested that a lawyer wouldn't stay in a place like Cedar Ridge unless he had compelling personal reasons. "I've been thinking," Thomas said one afternoon as he and Catherine walked along the creek that ran behind the town, "about us, about the future." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. "What about it?" Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. "I want to marry you, Catherine. I want to build a life with you here in Cedar Ridge." The word she had been hoping to hear still came as a shock. "Thomas. I know it's only been a few weeks," he continued, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Catherine felt tears in her eyes. "I want that too," she said. "But are you sure, really sure? You're giving up so much: your life in San Francisco, your established practice, everything familiar." "I'm not giving up anything," Thomas replied, taking her hands in his. "I'm gaining everything. A woman I love, a life that has meaning, a future that excites me instead of simply satisfying me. The people in this town can be difficult, Catherine warned. They're good people, but they can be set in their ways. I've noticed, Thomas said with a smile, but I think I can handle them. The question is, can you handle being married to a lawyer? Catherine laughed, feeling the last of her reservations melt away. I think I can manage that. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was hoping you'd say that. The ring was simple but beautiful, a single diamond set in a delicate gold band. Catherine gasped as Thomas slipped it onto her finger. It's perfect, she whispered. It belonged to my grandmother, Thomas said. She was a remarkable woman, much like you. She would have loved you. As they kissed, Catherine felt as though her entire world had crystallized around this moment. All the uncertainty, all the worry, all the doubt disappeared in the face of this simple, profound truth. She loved Thomas Brennan, and he loved her, and they were going to build a life together. The news of their engagement spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Most of the townspeople were genuinely happy for the couple, but the same conservative element that had expressed concerns about their courtship was now vocal in their disapproval of such a quick engagement. It's indecent, Catherine overheard Mrs. Whitmore saying to her friend outside the general store. They've known each other less than 2 months. When you know, Catherine's friend Sarah Martinez replied firmly. Anyone can see they're perfect for each other. Catherine was grateful for the support of friends like Sarah, but she was determined not to let the gossips affect her happiness. She and Thomas decided on a simple ceremony in the town church, with a reception at the hotel afterward. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Catherine continued working at the forge, but she also found herself planning, choosing flowers, and dealing with the 100 small details that seemed to multiply daily. Thomas was equally busy, working to establish his practice while also helping with wedding preparations. Are you sure you want to keep working after we're married? Thomas asked one evening as they reviewed the guest list. Catherine looked up from her list, surprised by the question. Of course. Why wouldn't I? Well, many wives don't work outside the home, Thomas said carefully, and I'm making enough to support us both. Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety. Are you saying you don't want me to work? I'm saying I want you to have the choice, Thomas replied. If you want to continue working, I support that completely. But if you'd rather focus on other things, our home, perhaps children someday, I want you to know that's possible too. The mention of children sent a warm glow through Catherine. She had always assumed she would never have a family of her own, too busy with work, and too independent to attract a suitable husband. The idea that she might have both a career and a family seemed almost too good to be true. I'd like to keep working, she said finally. At least for now. The forge has been my life for so long I can't imagine giving it up completely. Then that's what we'll do, Thomas said, leaning over to kiss her cheek. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem possible. Catherine stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she had chosen. It wasn't elaborate, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and she felt radiant wearing it. Her father appeared in the doorway, looking handsome in his best suit. You look beautiful, Cat, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Pa, Catherine replied, turning to face him. For everything. For teaching me the trade, for supporting my choices, for raising me to be independent. You did that yourself, James said, offering her his arm. I just tried to stay out of your way. The ceremony was simple but moving. Thomas looked handsome in his dark suit, and his eyes never left Catherine's face as she walked down the aisle. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the importance of building a life together based on mutual respect and shared values. When they exchanged vows, Catherine felt as though she were making a promise not just to Thomas, but to herself, a promise to remain true to who she was while opening herself to the possibilities of who she might become. I, Catherine, take you, Thomas, to be my husband, she said, her voice clear and strong. I promise to love you, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you based on honesty, respect, and joy. Thomas's vows were equally heartfelt. I, Thomas, take you, Catherine, to be my wife. I promise to love you for who you are, to support your independence, and to be your partner in all things. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. As they kissed, Catherine felt as though she were beginning an entirely new chapter of her life. Epilogue, 1 year later. Catherine stood in the doorway of the forge, watching Thomas work alongside her father on a complicated piece of ironwork. In the years since their wedding, Thomas had proven to be surprisingly adept at metalworking, and he often helped out when his legal practice was slow. "You're going to ruin your good clothes," she called out, but she was smiling. "These aren't my good clothes," Thomas replied, looking up with a grin. "These are my working clothes." Catherine laughed, marveling at how much their lives had changed. Thomas's law practice had flourished, and he had become a respected member of the community. Even the conservative element that had initially opposed their marriage had been won over by his professionalism and his obvious devotion to his wife. Catherine had continued working at the forge, but she had also begun teaching Thomas the finer points of metalworking. It was a skill that complemented his legal work, as many of his clients were ranchers and miners who appreciated a lawyer who understood their practical concerns. "How did the meeting with the territorial governor go?" Catherine asked, referring to Thomas's trip to the capital the previous week. "Very well," Thomas replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "There's going to be a lot of legal work as Colorado moves towards statehood. I'm thinking about taking on a partner." "Anyone in mind?" "Actually, yes. There's a young lawyer in Denver who's looking for a change of pace. He's interested in moving to a smaller town, and I think he'd be a good fit." Catherine nodded, pleased by the news. Thomas's success was a source of pride for her, but she also knew that he had been working long hours to handle all his clients' needs. "There's something else?" Thomas said, his expression becoming serious. "I've been thinking about the future, about what we want our life to look like." Catherine felt a familiar flutter of excitement. "What kind of future?" Thomas moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I'm thinking about a house of our own, something bigger than the rooms above my office, maybe with a workshop for you, and space for," he paused, his eyes twinkling, "space for a family." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. They had talked about children, but in abstract terms. The idea of actually starting a family suddenly seemed real and immediate. "I'd like that," she said softly. "All of it." Thomas pulled her into his arms, and Catherine marveled at how perfectly she fit against him. A year ago, she had been a single woman running a forge, content with her independence but secretly longing for something more. Now she was a wife, a partner, a woman building a life with the man she loved. "I love you, Catherine Brennan," Thomas whispered against her hair. "I love you too," Catherine replied, using her married name with the same thrill she had felt every day since their wedding. As they stood there in the doorway of the forge, surrounded by the tools and materials of Catherine's trade, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. She had always believed that she would have to choose between independence and love, between her career and a family. Thomas had shown her that such choices were false ones, that it was possible to have both love and independence, both a career and a family. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. A young man was riding toward them, his horse lathered with sweat and his expression urgent. "Mr. Brennan," the rider called out. "I'm looking for Thomas Brennan." Thomas stepped forward. "I'm Brennan. What can I do for you?" "I'm from the territorial court in Denver," the young man said, dismounting quickly. "There's been a development in the mining rights case you've been working on. The judge wants to see you immediately." Catherine felt a familiar surge of pride as she watched Thomas switch into his professional mode. He asked concise questions, made rapid decisions, and began preparing for the journey to Denver. "How long will you be gone?" Catherine asked as Thomas gathered his papers. "A few days, maybe a week," Thomas replied. "Will you be all right?" Catherine smiled. "I managed for 25 years before I met you. I think I can handle a few days." Thomas kissed her goodbye, and Catherine watched him ride away with the messenger. Then she turned back to the forge, where her father was banking the fire for the day. "Big case?" James asked. "It sounds like it," Catherine replied. "But Thomas can handle it." As the sun set over Cedar Ridge, Catherine stood in the doorway of the forge once more, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a blacksmith's daughter, become a skilled craftswoman in her own right, and now she was a wife and partner building a life with a man who respected her independence and shared her values. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and promise. There would be challenges, she knew. There always were. But she and Thomas would face them together, as partners and equals, supporting each other's dreams while building new ones of their own. Catherine smiled as she looked out at the mountains that surrounded their small town. She had found her place in the world, and more importantly, she had found her person. The girl who had once dreamed of seeing the world had discovered that sometimes the most important journey was the one that led you home, to yourself, to love, and to the life you were meant to live. The forge would always be part of who she was, but it was no longer the only part. She was Catherine Brennan now, wife and partner, craftswoman and dreamer, a woman who had learned that the strongest bonds, like the finest metalwork, were forged in fire and tempered with patience, skill, and love. As she closed the door of the forge and walked toward the house she shared with Thomas, Catherine felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived and a future full of promise. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and she made a silent wish on the first one she saw, not for anything new, but for the strength and wisdom to appreciate and protect the blessings she had already found. The end.